This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites, like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies, like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee for your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
Achieving a gorgeous grin from home isn't a total mystery with Bite Clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all of your sleuthing friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Have you ever covered a carpet stain with a rug, ignored a leaky faucet, pretended your half-painted living room is supposed to look like that? Well, you're not alone. We've all got unfinished home projects. But there's an easier way. Thumbtack is the app that makes it easier to care for your home. Pull out your phone and in just a few taps, search, chat, and book highly rated pros right in your neighborhood. Download Thumbtack and start caring for your home the easier way.
Content warning. This episode contains discussion of violence and murder. This episode also follows up from our previous episode, The Murder of Anita Byington, an interview with her cousin Christina Byington. For a more in-depth recounting of the facts of the crime, please go back and listen to the introduction of that episode.
On August 11th, 1991, a witness at the Spring Creek Apartments at 6407 Springdale Road in Austin, Texas, made a horrifying discovery. In the pale light of morning, a young woman's body lay battered in a grassy patch in the complex. This was 21-year-old Anita Byington. The Southwest Texas State University student had been out the night before with some friends and new acquaintances. She gave a ride to one of those acquaintances, a man named Kevin Harris. But she never made it back. Harris claimed he last saw her at 3 a.m. Her 1989 brown Honda was found at a different apartment complex. And of course, Anita herself was discovered dead around 6:30 a.m. She was brutally beaten, possibly with a concrete rain diverter. She died of severe head trauma. Her family was left devastated.
Kevin Harris, the man last seen with Anita, immediately became a focus of the investigation. After all, he made it home, and she was killed. He claimed that they'd had consensual sex before separating. But police only had his word for that. Anita was no longer around to explain whether or not she had actually consented.
Soon, though, Harris would become less of a focus. A man named Allen Andre Causey came by a group of witnesses who were clustered around the crime scene. He lived about a 7-minute drive away, and so he circled the scene in his car before approaching. Witnesses said he made odd statements. Notably, "I didn't kill her." He also claimed to have been the one to find the body. Police interviewed him and kept talking to him after they say he gave conflicting accounts of his location the night Anita was killed.
Causey said he was with his friend Bobby Harrell that evening. So Harrell was brought in too. But only Causey confessed. He said that he and Harrell had been out to buy crack cocaine. He saw Harrell outside arguing with a young woman. When the young woman tried to run, Causey said he chased her, knocked her down, and choked her. Harrell then ultimately killed her with a cement brick. Now, again, Harrell did not confess. So he eventually went free when the charges against him were dropped due to lack of evidence. But Causey's confession sealed his fate. He was tried and convicted, sentenced to 50 years in prison. In 2022, he was paroled after serving 31 years.
Now, a group of attorneys say that Causey deserves more than just parole. They say that Causey is a factually innocent man who spent decades of his life in prison over a crime he did not commit. They point to Kevin Harris as the real killer and say that Causey's confession was simply not true. that he may have been coerced or tricked by police officers.
In our last episode, we heard Anita's cousin Christina explain why she feels Causey is guilty and does not deserve to be exonerated. In this episode, we'll hear from the other side. The Innocence Project of Texas has taken up Causey's case. The Travis County Prosecutor's Office ultimately reached out to the team about some Brady violations. After conducting a joint investigation with the Innocence Project, prosecutors also determined that they believed Causey was innocent. Currently, Causey's team has undergone a number of hearings before a judge, seeking exoneration. Once the judge makes her decision, it will go to a higher court.
Of course, this isn't the Innocence Project of Texas's first time working such a case. Currently led by Executive Director Mike Ware, this group has helped either exonerate or free 34 incarcerated individuals. We had the chance to interview Mr. Ware, along with Senior Staff Attorney Jessi Freud, Staff Attorney Chase Baumgartner, and Attorney Amber Vasquez.
They told us about Causey's case and why they believe the evidence strongly points to his innocence. They also explain what they really believe happened to Anita. They talk about why they feel local and national politics have had an impact on the case. And they told us about the work they do striving to exonerate and free their clients, from the moment a prisoner writes them a letter to the court hearings that would ultimately determine that prisoner's fate.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Murder of Anita Byington, an interview with the Innocence Project of Texas.
I suppose to start out with, can you all please just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your legal background and how you came to work with the Innocence Project?
Sure, I can start. I'm Jessi Freud. I'm a senior staff attorney with the Innocence Project of Texas. I have been a staff attorney since 2018, but I actually got started with IPTX as a law student at Baylor. My first case that I worked on was the Joe Bryan case. Some people may be familiar with that case, out of Clifton, Texas. And I was a volunteer law student and then a volunteer lawyer until 2018 when I became staff counsel. And I split my time between the organization and my private practice, where I now just do appellate and post-conviction work.
My name is Chase Baumgartner. I'm a staff attorney with the Innocence Project of Texas. And I've been full-time with them since November of 2022. And just like Jessi, I started as a volunteer law student as well. But the reason I got plugged into the Innocence Project was because of my prior work with the Texas Department of Public Safety as a DNA analyst. I actually heard Jessi speak at Baylor about the Joe Bryan case. She talked about the difficulties of the forensic science. I reached out to her and said, would you like some help in forensic cases going forward? She said, come on board. And we've been working together ever since. So that's how I got plugged in.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates. Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto! The car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
What makes a life a good one? Is it the adventure you have? Or the friends you find along the way? Maybe it's pursuing your passion while striving to protect, defend, and save what you believe in every single day. So, what makes a life a good one? In the Coast Guard, we think it's all of the above and more, but you'll have to find out for yourself. Visit gocoastguard.com to learn more.
There's nothing worse than getting home from your trip only to find you missed a can't-miss travel experience. That's why you need Viator. Book guided tours, excursions, and more in one place to make your trip truly unregrettable. There are over 300,000 travel experiences to choose from, so you can find something for everyone. And Viator offers free cancellation and 24/7 customer service, so you always have support around the clock. Download the Viator app now to use code Viator10 for 10% off your first booking in the app. Regret less. Do more with Viator.
I'm Amber Vasquez. I'm a private criminal defense attorney in Austin, and I handle murders and cold cases and things like that, and have just joined in as local counsel on this case to help out kind of logistically with the local climate and culture to get through it. So, yeah, it's been a pleasure working with these guys.
Les, Amber's an excellent lawyer, and she's kind enough to be working pro bono.
Yeah.
So my name is Mike Ware. I'm an attorney in Fort Worth, Texas. I've been licensed since 1983. I'm board certified in criminal law. I was a criminal defense lawyer for decades and became interested in innocence work in about 2005 when the local law school here started an innocence program with their students, and they asked me to be their adjunct professor. And then in 2006, I co-founded the Innocence Project of Texas, which is a freestanding 501c3 nonprofit. And with a law school friend of mine, Jeff Blackburn. And then in 2007, Fred Watkins got elected to the position of district attorney of Dallas County. And he was the first black district attorney of Dallas County, the first black district attorney in Texas. And Dallas County at that time, and for the previous 50 years or whatever, had a terrible reputation for unethical conduct, for racism. And we were in the adjacent county, Tarrant County, and we hated going to Dallas County because of the way we were treated, the way our clients were treated when we went over there. So that was sort of a standard with us in Tarrant County, how much we hated Dallas County. And it was pretty much true all over the state. I mean, they came by their reputation honestly. I don't know if you ever saw the documentary Thin Blue Line about the Randall Dale Adams case. That's pretty typical of Dallas County. And of course, after that, there was a lesser known case that was on 60 Minutes, Linnell Jeter, that was exonerated, I don't know, in the 80s. Anyway, when Craig got elected, a lot of people started fleeing the DA's office because they were scared that he was going to expose them. He was an outsider, et cetera. And he did run on a platform of reform, although at the time we didn't know to what degree. But he asked me to come over there to leave private practice, come next door to Dallas County, and start what he and his first assistant, Terry Moore, who was a very good friend of mine, were calling a conviction integrity unit. At that time, no one had ever heard of conviction integrity units. There were no conviction integrity units. We really didn't know what it was. We were just going to start one and run one in real time. We had no templates to go by. But the idea was Dallas County had so many wrongful convictions, just that we knew of, that we believed it would be the right thing to do to have a unit to investigate potential and possible wrongful convictions from inside the district attorney's office and to cooperate with defense lawyers in cases in which we as professionals, as experienced professionals, believed that this person was completely innocent. It was a revolutionary idea, frankly, at the time, and we got a whole lot of pushback by conservative Dallas County, but it turned out we were very successful. And during the 4 years I was there, we had, approximately 25 proven exonerations of completely innocent men that had been convicted by past administrations. And so the concept caught on all over the country. And you hear about conviction integrity units now. I mean, Indianapolis may have one. I don't know. But, New York, Manhattan has one. Los Angeles has one. There's, 4 or 5 in Texas. They're all different. Philadelphia definitely has one. They're all different. And some are what have been known as CRINOs, conviction integrity units in name only, but some of them are very good. But anyway, when I left Dallas County to go back into private practice in 2011, I went back on the board of the Innocence Project of Texas. My first case when I went back was the San Antonio 4, which became a case of some notoriety and success. There's an award-winning documentary about the case called Southwest of Salem. And then in 2015, I became the executive director of the Innocence Project of Texas and started devoting most of my time to both teaching the law school students and to running the nonprofit. Now, I kept my private practice for a while. I've just recently given up my private practice completely, except for the old cases that are hanging around. But I've been the executive director since 2015.
Absolutely. I want to start off with a process question, and that's just something folks may not realize, but how does the Innocence Project of Texas go about selecting cases that you're sort of going to work on, help with, things like that?
You know, it's a process, and it's some of the hardest work that we do and the most important work that we do, because we do get a lot of solicitations. I mean, we don't charge for our work, and there are well over 130,000 inmates in Texas state prisons. And the experts who study these things say that, from my understanding, these are academics, et cetera, that probably 2 to 6% of convicted felons are actually innocent, that they didn't do what it is they were convicted of, or any lesser included offenses or anything like that. So if you apply that to 130,000 plus inmates, and that doesn't include inmates in the local county jails, it doesn't include federal inmates, it doesn't include people who are serving criminal justice sentences on parole or probation. If you just apply that percentage to the well over 130,000, conservatively, there's probably 5,000 completely innocent people in Texas prisons. So identifying those people is a huge part of our job, and it's a process. I don't think the old trope that everybody in prison says they're innocent is true, because that's not true at all. A whole lot of people in prison do not claim that they're innocent. Some may even brag about their crimes, but a lot of people write us. Maybe we get well over 100 letters a month. That usually is what begins the process. Some people are not even claiming actual innocence, but they have some other legal issue. And of course, that's not what we do. We weed those out. But we have to do our due diligence with everyone. We have to read the trial transcripts, order the trial transcripts, read the police report. And if it still looks promising, if it still looks like this person really is actually innocent, and by that, what we mean is the crime either happened pretty much like the police, the witnesses, and the prosecution say it happened. It's just this person didn't do it. It was somebody else. Or it may be that there was no crime at all. The San Antonio 4 case, for example, there was no crime at all. They got prosecuted for a crime that had no existence outside the words of the indictment. One example of those, and we have a case going right now, are arson cases where, initially at the trial, some police officer, fireman, arson investigator, maybe with a high school education, testified as to their opinion that this was an arson and why. Now we know through modern updated science that many, if not all of the things that were formerly considered to be hallmarks, red flags of an arson, are not hallmarks of an arson at all. And that the fire that someone got convicted of setting actually was not arson at all, but was caused by something completely different. The Butch Martin case we have going on in Texas is like that. So that's a case in which people died. So he was charged with arson and murder. And in fact, it was not even an arson. So there was no crime.
Can you tell us about Allen Andre Causey and how the Innocence Project came to take on that particular case?
Jessi, you want to address that?
Sure. So Andre had written us about, I think, a couple years before We had eventually been contacted by the Travis County Conviction Integrity Unit, notifying us that, hey, they knew we were looking into this case because he had written for our assistance, and that they had a Brady disclosure to make to us. And that based on that Brady disclosure, they believed they were going to open a reinvestigation into the case, wanted to make sure that because he was represented, that we were timely notified. And then from there, the reinvestigation moved forward. So it was a combination of, we had started the process that Mike talked about of looking into the case because he had written us, and then our process became accelerated because of the notification we received from the Conviction Integrity Unit.
Just to give a sense of just setting the scene, when did all that happen? How long has your team been working on this case?
By this point, I want to say at least 3 or 4 years. Chase, does that sound right?
Yeah, I think he wrote in 2018 or 19. I'll see if I can pull up the letter here while we're...
And then by the time we actually were able to get to him, it was somewhere, I think, between 2020, around the pandemic, and 2021. And then I believe the notification from the Conviction Integrity Unit should have been, I believe, in early 2022, I believe around April.
Yeah, he wrote to us end of 2018, and that's when we wrote him our first letter back, was December 7th of 2018.
Understood. So this takes time. This is not an overnight process, it sounds like. I was wondering, can you tell us about Mr. Causey's case and, specifically Anita Byington, what happened to her? What are sort of the underlying facts of what he was charged with and what your team sort of found as you dug into it?
Sure. So Anita Byington was found behind an East Austin apartment complex on August 11th of 1991 after she went out for an evening on 6th Street with a group of 5 friends. And she was found tragically beaten, and she was clothed. She was found face down on the ground. There was a concrete rain diverter found a couple feet from her body that had a saturated blood stain on it. And approximately between 6:30 and 7 in the morning, an apartment resident had called 911 after discovering her body.
And for your Indianapolis listeners, 6th Street in Austin is like the Broad Ripple of Indianapolis. So it's the street full of bars and just full of, that kind of nightlife. So it should give you a sense of that.
Chase, that is very much appreciated. Now I can definitely picture that. So in terms of, this is obviously a horrible, horrible murder of a young woman. In terms of how you dig into it and then sort of determined, I guess even before Travis County sort of got involved, what was sort of indicating to you that this might be, in your opinion, a wrongful conviction that the team would want to work on, I suppose?
So I think one of the first red flags was obviously the fact that the client had really maintained his innocence. That's always something that's very important to us, that the client has been unwavering in the maintaining of his innocence. And also that we now know that, and came to learn even more so once we got the Brady information, but we now know that a lot of the accounts of the confession that was attributed to him, we knew after the fact were consistent and reliable with some other experiences of individuals who had been interrogated by the Austin Police Department Homicide Unit during this period of time, which is really between 1988 and 1992. And that alone, I think, was a real big red flag. APD Homicide had a notorious reputation by the time we get the case that they were knowingly taking false confessions from murder suspects in very high profile cases. That, again, coupled with the information about cases like individuals like Chris Ochoa, who ended up testifying at our evidentiary hearing about his experience and his 2002 exoneration. There were just so many similarities between what Andre had said happened to him at trial and what we now knew 20, 30 years later about that experience for murder suspects interrogated by APD Homicide Unit during that time. Most notably, of course, Hector Polanco.
And that's all coupled with the lack of other evidence supporting the confession, or the conviction rather. the lack of evidence supporting the conviction, it really just all rested on the confession. So there was no other evidence we had to refute. Once the confession fell apart, the rest of the case was nothing to support that he was guilty in any sense.
I'll also say, and of course, I'll be the first to concede that, in evaluating the case, you have to be very careful about this sort of thing. But it was true with the San Antonio Four. When I went down and talked to those 4 women in prison, I firmly believe there's no way they could have committed a crime anything close to what they were convicted of. And with Andre is a gentle soul, a gentle, quiet soul with no violent criminal history. It just seemed it didn't make sense.
The lack of relationship to, of course, the state's theory of the case that this was a stranger on stranger drug deal gone wrong. They attributed that Anita was a drug user. Like, to go to Chase's point about lack of corroboration, that was a big red flag for us, that the case file represented very strong statements by her family that she had zero history of using drugs. And so for the occasion that she's murdered, for this to be her first experience, again, lack of corroboration just seemed very inconsistent with the single piece of evidence in this case, which was this statement.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, and this kind of gets into something Mike said earlier about these conviction integrity units. So Travis County Prosecutor's Office sort of reaches out to you with this Brady issue. I guess, can you speak through their role in this, and sort of, is that typically what prosecutors' offices are doing, or are we seeing more and more of that as some of these convictions are being looked at closer?
I think Mike is probably the best person to talk about historical disclosures and practices. But now, since the Michael Morton Act in Texas, there is a statutory right that defendants have, and that is imputed on prosecutors to make disclosures even after conviction. Time doesn't matter, about any favorable evidence that would be material to guilt or punishment. And so that is, I think, maybe something that's a little different in Texas than maybe some other jurisdictions. But Mike can talk about what they were doing in Dallas when this all started.
Yeah. And even before Dallas, in Chris Ochoa's case, which was part of the Polanco era, which is what this has come to become known as, the Polanco era. We didn't give it that name, but this almost about a 2-year window, of which, Andre's case is right in the middle of, when the Polanco crew took 7 proven false confessions. And I think maybe we don't need to get too far off into the weeds on this, but there's a difference between a coerced confession and a false confession. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes confessions are false because they're coerced. Sometimes not. A recent case we had out of Ector County, which is Odessa, Texas, home of Friday Night Lights, not a very liberal place. We had complete cooperation with the district attorney's office there. They don't actually have a formal conviction integrity unit. They're a relatively small office, but we had complete cooperation with them in exonerating James Reyes, who is a man who falsely confessed to a murder back in the 1980s and was convicted because of that false confession. He's a full-blooded Apache. He was a young man at the time. He did have a relationship with the Irish Catholic priest who was murdered in a seamy motel room, but he was obviously innocent of that. Yet he got intoxicated and called the police department and confessed to it, oddly enough. And we had an expert who kind of explained all that. But that's not a coerced confession, but it's a proven false confession, because through the good work of the Odessa Police Department recently and the good work of the Ector County DA's office recently, they have proven through forensic evidence the actual perpetrators of that crime and agreed to relief. So this is not unique to Travis County or new to Travis County. As a matter of fact, in the Chris Ochoa case, Ronnie Earl, back in 2001, agreed to relief. Ronnie Earl, the legendary longtime DA of Travis County, who I think everybody respects, agreed to relief in the Chris Ochoa case. But, it did not become, as and conviction integrity units did not become really as ubiquitous until we did it successfully in Dallas for those 4 years I was there, 2007 to 2011. And so now it's not uncommon for a district attorney's office to say, when the Code of Criminal Procedure says it is the duty of the prosecuting authority to do justice and not just seek convictions, more and more offices are taking that seriously now. Many are not. I can tell you from personal experience, many are not, but more and more are. Our recent exoneration out of Bexar County with Melvin Quinney is an example of that, and that's Bexar County. It depends on the county and the conviction integrity unit. But what Travis County is doing in this case has been going on for a long time now, and is even in Travis County under Ronnie Earl. And there's nothing really unusual about the way they're handling this case. And in fact, it's just indication that they take their ethical duty to seek justice very, very seriously.
I will say and add to this, I think after practicing in Travis for 20 years, there's an interesting kind of thing going on that I think is influencing all of this right now, because the DA's office is very strident about progressive criminal justice reform. And there's been a lot of pushback from police unions, specifically in Austin, and really pro law enforcement groups. And I mean, we just went through an election here, and that was, I got flyers every day. Every single person in my neighborhood did. It was intense. And I think that unfortunately, because, again, I think the DA's office is doing what an ethical DA's office would do in this circumstance. But I think the underlying relationship right now with law enforcement in Austin and this kind of push and pull that's going on, I think has hindered maybe sailing this through as easily as it should based on the evidence. I think in a case where we didn't have all these other things going on in town that influence it, I think it would just be so obvious. I don't know, but I think that has played a little bit of a factor, because Travis County has started a conviction integrity unit, but we've had a few before. Yogurt Shop was one that came to mind in '92. Springsteen. This was in that era. And ironically, Springsteen's attorney Joe Sawyer represents Bobby Harrell, who's on board, obviously now with exonerating Causey and his own, innocence that he's always maintained. But we've seen it in Travis, but it's a one-party town. There's not a lot of push and pull in a lot of elections. And so things don't get aired out that often is the best way that I can say it. And so other than, that, and obviously the things that Mike's brought up, it has been more limited. And I think that as far as like the press that it's gotten, and I think the understanding in the courthouse. And so I just think that it's taken a minute to get everybody on board to understand how clear the evidence is in this case.
And the tension between the police unions and a progressive DA is not unique to Travis County. As I'm sure you are aware. I mean, probably the quintessential example that I know something about, I mean, every case is different, is what's, been going on in Philadelphia. One thing that the current administration, as I understand it, in Travis County has been doing is prosecuting police officers who, frankly, murder people. And that's not popular with the police unions, so that really doesn't even bear on what the conviction integrity unit is doing. It just adds to the general animosity. And Amber, you want to give an example of some of the flyers you saw?
I think I got 23 in a period of like 30 days that would say things like Jose Garza is releasing rapists and murderers to our community to attack our children. And they were all APA. The union did most of it. And I mean, I think I counted 15 texts. We were getting robocalls. It was the most intense barrage I've seen in a long time. It was so intense, though, it turned off Travis County voters, and they voted for Jose Garza by 70%. So
even though his opponent outspent him substantially.
Yeah. Like I think Jeremy spent $1.2 million. I think Jose had like 200 or something crazy. So it was pretty disproportionate, but I think it causes some misinformation to get out there. And I think that, again, this case is so clear and so overwhelming. It's been, I guess, a little unfortunate that I think some local politics have prevented it from, I guess, being as clear as it should be.
I'm curious about, just more on the process side of things. Once your team gets this reach out from Travis County and there's sort of like, okay, they're looking into it too now. What's the process going forward then? Like, how do you then approach a case like that where you do have the prosecutor's office saying perhaps that they also feel like there's been an issue here, and sort of how do you unpack that? How do both sides kind of work that at that point?
I'm happy to answer that. I think it's really an ebb and flow. Like, we have a job to do. We have a client. Their client is justice, right? But we have an investigation to do ourselves. We have an application to file. It really is, I think the only real difference is the extent of the cooperation. So when we were going and interviewing witnesses, I had a DA's office investigator with me. So where maybe in other cases where there isn't that cooperation, we're interviewing witnesses by ourselves with our own investigator. So if anything, it's really, I think, a set maybe for people who are skeptical of our work. You have the government looking over my shoulder while I'm talking to people and being involved to the extent they want to be involved. Again, I think the other difference is really just a sharing of information, but like Mike and Amber talked about, that's an ethical obligation. It's a statutory obligation. It's a constitutional obligation. So that's really not new otherwise. So I think it's not adversarial. So you're not having to think strategically about, well, if the other side knows this, how am I gonna go lose because somebody is just trying to fight with me for the sake of winning, not for the right outcome. And I think that's really the only difference. Otherwise, I mean, we all are doing our work. We're all trying to find the truth. And I just think when you take the adversarial component out of it, it's really just designed to make communication smoother, more transparent, and the path to hopefully making something wrong right faster.
And then just to back up, just so our listeners understand, what was it that made the Travis County Prosecutor's Office say, hey, we need to act upon this? You mentioned the Brady issue. If you could go into more detail about sort of the kind of moment that they felt that they needed to give this a second look.
So a lot of the disclosures that we received were for records that are confidential by statute. And so I have to be careful because those still will have to remain protected and spoken about appropriately. But I think I can speak generally. And it was the trial attorney in this case was so diligent and tried so hard to get information about what he believed must have been information about APD homicide doing what he knew his client was saying was happening. And I think by our count, he asked 7 different times, 7 different ways, got a court order, and was still told, either you're not getting it either by actual words or by silence, meaning something non-responsive. And I think they felt their obligation was triggered. I don't want to speak for them, but my understanding is there was a court order in place that trial counsel got that was not properly responded to. And they came into knowledge and possession of information and records that were directly responsive to the trial court's order that were not produced and that would have been otherwise very consistent with Mr. Causey's account of his interrogation and showed a knowing pattern and practice of what this group of homicide detectives was doing to murder suspects. And so I think it was the totality of those circumstances.
And that definitely was my memory is what got the district attorney on board with a new trial for Mr. Causey. But for them agreeing to actual innocence, that took a while. And it really wasn't until we identified a new witness from a note in the files they disclosed. It was, handwritten, just a single sheet of paper. And their investigator was able to track down this witness. And she was able to, we brought her in for deposition, and she was able to basically contradict the written statement that Mr. Causey had, allegedly given. that incriminated him because she was able to give an account that was different. And it really, Mr. Causey's statement talks about moving the car after murdering Anita. Well, she says, I was there that night and I helped my ex-boyfriend move that car. I recognize it from this photograph. Both us and the district attorney, again, I don't want to speak for them, but at that moment realized that both these accounts can't be true. They can't both have moved the car from the apartment where Anita was murdered to this other apartment complex. It's just not possible. So if this witness is to be believed, and I think we both found her credible, the court, I think, has found her credible, then Mr. Causey's statement must be false. And that's, I think, the turning point for all of us. We knew we had evidence of actual innocence in this case.
And then on top of her deposition, we corroborated her statement and found another witness that she was actually with the night that she goes with the alternate suspect to move Anita's car. And so her statement was able to be corroborated. Again, in the statement she gave, just directly contradicted the written statement, which again was the only evidence in this case.
And one of the most fantastical parts about that corroborating evidence, it's kind of stranger than fiction, but it's like, why do you remember that night 30 years ago? Like, why do you have such a clear memory of it? And it's like, oh, it was my birthday. My birthday's August 11th. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, okay, that makes it a memorable night for sure. So it's kind of just, I guess, lucky for Mr. Causey that happened, so they have such a clear memory of that night.
And it was, yeah. And the really magical part about that was the witness that helped the alternate suspect move the car. She could place the day in all kinds of ways, but, couldn't put an actual date on it. It's 30 years ago. While the witness that corroborates her that Chase just talked about, the friend that she was with, she goes, I know exactly why that was. And it was my 18th birthday. And, here's my driver's license with my birthday. And here's why I remember that birthday so clearly, because it was the year I had my first kid and I was pregnant in high school, and being pregnant in high school makes that year, very unfortunately memorable and stressful. And this was my first birthday after that. So my best friend was with me that night. So of course I remember that, because she went to go, she left me on my birthday to go help her on and off again boyfriend do this. And so it was just one of those moments that really did kind of feel like a movie. And there was just really no denying that this is actually what happened. And the statement just wasn't true.
One thing I was curious about is just from the perspective of, obviously it's not the Innocence Project of Texas's job to solve the case or, prosecute anybody, but it sounds like there's a sort of an alternate suspect and an alternate theory of the crime where Mr. Causey is innocent and perhaps someone else perpetrated this horrible crime against Miss Byington. Could you speak to that and sort of what has come together as far as your own opinions about what happened to Anita that night? If that makes sense.
It does. Our opinion is that and I believe what the evidence supports, is that this was a single perpetrator murder. And it was a murder that occurred during or at some point, whether before or after, a sexual assault. And not a two-person stranger on stranger drug deal gone wrong with a victim that we know has no drug history in a part of town she had no connection to, but the alternate suspect did. And so, yes, that's what the evidence supports. This was a single perpetrator murder during which a sexual assault occurred at some point.
Well, I also think that the science is so overwhelming. We haven't even talked about that, but the science is overwhelmingly, it supports what happened and what is consistent with these other witnesses. It just seems at this point pretty clear from the series of evidence what occurred.
Could you speak to some of the science and sort of how that backs up the case for, exonerating Mr. Causey?
Because Chase, we are lucky enough with his DNA background, we always do all right, to you, bro, you talk about it. You do sciencey stuff and we'll listen.
Sure. So there's always been a semen stain associated with the alternate suspect from Anita's vagina and her underwear. That was suspected, I think, by blood typing in the early 90s. It was confirmed in 2000 with DNA, traditional STR DNA analysis. But our new testing has developed quite a few more semen stains. So there was a semen stain found on the back of her blouse near the bottom hem. and that's also associated with the alternate suspect. But oddly, there are also 3 semen stains on her shorts, both interior and on the outside of her shorts, that were mixtures of blood and semen, all associated with the alternate suspect. So this, story, and this is part of the problem, right? When forensic evidence of a consensual sexual encounter and a sexual assault can look similar, the only difference is, what the survivor's account of it. And in this case, we don't have a survivor to tell us what happened. So when you just look at the evidence of 2000, semen in a vagina or underwear looks consistent with the potential sex story that he alleged. But now when you have semen on the back of her blouse mixed with her blood on her shorts, it's not quite as clear as if that would be the consensual encounter he, testified it was. And I think that's the evidence Amber was talking about. We've also had that compared to Mr. Causey's DNA. He's excluded from all those stains. So we have not only associated with the alternate suspect, but we have our client, Mr. Causey, excluded from it. And that's, Dr. Leo talked about how do you prove a confession false? And one of those ways you can prove a confession false is proving someone else did it. So while we don't have a legal obligation to prove who did this or to prosecute anyone, proving an alternate suspect is responsible, just like that, just like moving the car, does prove innocence in some instances.
The alternate suspect in this case, just to be clear, was the individual who was undisputedly the last person known to be seen with her alive. And his account included a consensual sexual encounter. And so to Chase's point about the testing that was done in 2000, that didn't move the needle at all because his story had included a consensual sexual encounter. While the testing that we did is inconsistent with a consensual sexual encounter. And so that's just to explain kind of who the individual we're talking about, the fact that, again, it was not in dispute that he was with her, seen with her last. Again, it was why he is interviewed, spoken with, and his account just had them conveniently separating at a different point in the night and him denying going with her to the area where she was found. He also denied a familiarity with the area in its entirety, which was also a part of the newly discovered evidence that we had in the form of the 2 witnesses we just talked about that were able to not just say, yeah, he knew the east side of town, but that he was intimately familiar with. And that is really where all of the people in his life lived. All of the main people in his life lived, which he denied at the time.
You are familiar of what this alternate suspect did in 1999 when, by all appearances, it appears that he attempted to sexually assault and murder another woman. You are familiar with that, are you not?
Yes. Would you mind speaking more to that second sort of incident, I suppose?
Sure. So in October of 1999, a woman is followed home from an area nightclub where she was a waitress and is followed into her home by this alternate suspect. He forces his way in, begins to assault her. She believes that this assault is not just about to be physical, but is likely about to be a sexual assault. And she screams for her life. And fortunately, her roommate happened to be home and sleeping and heard and called 911. That case went to trial. She testified. She maintained her story. A jury convicted him not of the felony burglary of a habitation with intent to commit assault that he was charged with, but a misdemeanor assault. And the judge sentenced him to a year in the county jail for that. And then fast forward, we know now that there is a third victim out of Harris County that also bravely testified at our evidentiary hearing. The account is frighteningly similar to what we know about what happened to Anita, what happened to the victim in 1999, and then again, what's now happened a third time in 2021. And so, we believe that this all shows, sadly, Anita was at least the first or one of the first victims of this individual, and that he has perpetrated at least again on 2 women that have at least tried to hold him responsible for what he did to them. Who knows how many more that there may be.
And so I want to ask you one thing, and then I want to get into sort of what sort of the procedural next steps are and sort of how that is going. But Anita's cousin, Anita Byington, has been unhappy and feels that Mr. Causey is guilty, or at least has doubts about his innocence, and has kind of talked about maybe feeling a bit blindsided by the whole process by the DA's office, like not feeling looped in or alerted. And I mean, the Innocence Project is here to advocate for their clients, right? Not loop in everybody. But I can kind of understand some of the criticism of the DA's office in that sense of like kind of letting people know this is happening. There's just so many competing sort of, it feels like, viewpoints in cases like this, and it can be hard to kind of get everyone on the same page. I think Amber talked about that a bit, about how, you know, there's a lot of noise in addition, politically speaking, with, you know, cop unions having their say as well. I guess, you know, when you see some of that criticism, or when you sort of think about those alternate perspectives, as people who do this work, do you see a way for, you know, different kind of parties to kind of come together on this and maybe talk about just the evidence and get on the same page? Or how do you feel about that? I'll throw it to you.
So first, absolutely. Like you said, priority number one is our client, right? That's what a lawyer's responsibility is. No question. She's not our client. No victim's family is our client, but is an intention of ours through this process always to provide healing and closure and truth? Absolutely. In every case, that is what we want to give to everyone. Again, priority number one is our client, but a very close second is always going to be everybody who was impacted by this. And one thing we hoped, maybe naively, was that the truth actually is consistent with what we always understood to be the family's position historically from the records we read, that she was not a drug user. And so a state's theory that said this is a drug deal gone wrong, again, is just inconsistent with the history and account of what is known about their family member. And so I'll just say individually, that was something that just surprised me, because I would have thought that there would have been some validation in that. Like, her parents had been telling law enforcement, she's not a drug user. Why is this theory a theory that, she was soliciting drugs and that this all happened about drugs? So again, perhaps naively, I was personally optimistic that the truth would help validate what the family historically, from what we knew, had been very adamant about. But otherwise, just generally speaking, we understand that digging all of this up is going to be emotional for anybody involved. And so we're always going to give grace to somebody who is hurting, and everybody's hurting. And everybody, our client's wife who lived without him for 30 years, all of the things he missed out on, his mother dying while he was gone, everybody is in pain. And any way we can try and use this as an opportunity, kind of through the pain, to hope that truth will be healing is always our intention, never anything else. But what we can't do is we can't let somebody's healing process interfere with our quest for the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that may get at points.
I also think the players and kind of the context of it have played a factor. Mr. Keel, was representative of the police union for most of his career, who was the original prosecutor, and I think represents Anita Byington. And so I think there's been a lot of push and pull that's kind of involved in local politics, unfortunately, because for me, and listening to what Jessi was just saying, one of the things that jumps out at me is the accusation that she went with this guy that has a girlfriend, had sex in a car consensually while going to get crack, which none of that is consistent. And quite frankly, I don't know, outside of 91, if you could throw stuff around like that of somebody that didn't have a reputation for any of that, and any of it would ever have stick. I mean, that kind of misogyny, hopefully we're moving forward and not there where you can just throw out something completely inconsistent with a woman's character and life, and everyone just uses that as the premise. I mean, I think it's hard to accept, I guess, that was so easily accepted, in 91 when this went down. And it's, I'm hopeful that the family, will be able to digest the new evidence that is so overwhelming and so clear, and quite frankly, consistent with the person that I believe, Anita Byington seeed to be at the time, who just a straight up victim who wasn't going to get crack and didn't get involved in a drug deal gone wrong after having sex with a random man with a girlfriend in a car. I mean, it just, the whole scenario seems like something hopefully we've moved past of, I guess if this case came in my door today, I can't even imagine it getting indicted with the evidence that we now have. Like, it would never have because the evidence is so overwhelming to one side. And so I do think it's unfortunate the local politics have somehow prevented, Christina Byington and some of the other family to getting, I feel like, the information that would be consistent with the person they know and actually get them some closure. I still hope that they get there. It seems like it would behoove everyone.
Yes, that is absolutely our hope, that maybe at the end of this, everybody can come around, accept what is undisputedly the truth, and start to heal, because the anger and rage about something that's just not true, that's not good for anybody.
I wanted to ask you, in terms of next steps for Mr. Causey's case, what are we looking at going forward? It's my understanding that there may be a final hearing on April 26th. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. What does that look like? And what are your hopes for the outcome in this?
So April 26th, you are correct, is going to be final argument, at which time we're going to ask the judge to find that Andre is actually innocent, because he is, and make a recommendation to the Court of Criminal Appeals that he be granted that relief, that the Court of Criminal Appeals find that he is actually innocent. The way that procedurally happens, because I know you were kind of interested in the paperwork part, after we argue, we will prepare a document called Findings of Fact and Conclusions of Law that we will ask the judge to sign. She can sign our copy, she can make her own copy, but ultimately the important part to us is that she ultimately make, again, that recommendation of relief that he be found actually innocent. And then from there, we have a couple more sets of paperwork that we have to do. This is our most important request for relief, so that's why we're doing a final argument on the 26th, but we'll have a couple other claims to wrap up paperwork-wise. And then at the end, what happens procedurally is all of the work that we've done, transcripts, exhibits, findings of fact and conclusions of law, our application for writ of habeas corpus, all of that is put together in a big old stack of stuff from the clerk of the court, and it's sent up to the Court of Criminal Appeals. And then we bite our nails and we wait to see if they do what we're asking them to do. And then again, between then and now, we'll find out if the judge is going to make that recommendation of relief on actual innocence or not.
Wanted to open it up to everybody. I'm just curious if you could maybe all go around and just, speak to what it's like to work on a case like this, what it means to you personally, kind of doing this work. I imagine it can be pretty heavy at times. And so I'd love to kind of hear from each of you, and then I'll open it up after that just to, see if there's anything that we didn't cover that you think it's important for folks to understand about this case, or just the work you do in general.
It's been amazing. I do trial work. So, I'm in sales, not warranties, like these guys. And so it's been really, fascinating for me, kind of looking at it through the appellate lens and through, looking at it in reverse backwards, because I look at things from the other way of how I would approach a case. But it's just been so fascinating, and I am into how thorough they are. I mean, you really do get to hindsight really is 2020. I think that's what I've taken out of it. I mean, what you can do looking back at it, what the Innocence Project can do in retrospect as far as looking back and shedding light it's been extraordinary. So I'm in for anything they'll let me ride along on.
Everything.
And for me, so this is, I'm still a young attorney, just less than 2 years out from passing the bar here in Texas. But coming from a scientific background, right, I was used to giving objective evidence of looking for the truth. And that's why it's been such a good fit here at the Innocence Project, because really that perspective is the same. We're looking for objective evidence. We're looking for the truth. And when that all aligns, we have a great case. And what I love about this more than being at the witness stand is the impact you get to have, not only in a courtroom. I think it's more impactful to be at the counsel table and the witness stand, but actually in these people's lives, to be there for Andre and his wife, to walk through it with them. It's amazing. It's so powerful. I'm so grateful that they let me, stand in with them when they're the ones who've lived through all this. So it's been devastating to see kind of the collateral consequences of this, but it's also been it's amazing work to be a part of. So I'm glad to be here doing it.
Mike, what about for you? You've only been doing it 105 years.
Not that long. Andre and his wife Delonda are wonderful people, and it really is. I mean, it really is moving how they have stuck together through all of this for 30 years or longer. And what happened back in the trial in 2002 and the so-called investigation leading up to that trial, et cetera, was tragic. It's a horrible tragedy and an affront to justice. That Andre, an innocent man, a peaceful man, got convicted of a murder he had nothing to do with and had to serve all of this time, missing out on his life for a murder he had nothing to do with, while the actual perpetrator skated. But fortunately, our system does provide for a procedure to correct those injustices. And I really enjoy working on correcting those abject injustices, those profound injustices. And that's what this case has been. And the satisfaction I get from it are the victories we get. We don't always win, and it's profoundly disappointing when we don't. But we hope we can prevail on this. And to me, correcting those profound injustices of the past is rewarding.
I mean, Mike, I think hit it right on the head. One of the greatest memories I have of the past couple of years, the first was bringing Andre his first set of findings, saying he was going to get a new trial, brought that to his birthday to surprise him, and watching him cry. It was a lot. And then watching him and Delonda renew their vows, giving somebody their life back. It's so nice. Somebody who just did not deserve to have this happen to him. He is the kindest man, the gentlest. He is just, it's so terrible that he had to go through this. So trying to give him his life back is really nice.
We just want to say thank you all so much for taking the time to speak to us and speak to your experiences and open up about what this case has meant to you. I wanted to throw it to you. Anything we didn't ask about? I know there's a lot I'm sure we didn't touch upon, but any big points that you think would be important for our audience's understanding, just anything else you wanted to say. So I'll just open it up to you.
I'll just jump in and say, I can't think about anything but getting this across the finish line. There is only one right result in this based on what these people have worked on for years. It is so overwhelming. I am so hopeful that the team will be able to make this as clear as it is from our viewpoint to everyone else, including the family, including the court, everyone, because this is an actual exoneration. Absolutely.
We wish to sincerely thank the Innocence Project of Texas team for sharing their insights and experiences with us.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.